Crises of Humanity. Chapter 2. Outline of the crisis the Earth is facing. Crisis: global warming. Global warming is being caused by an adverse domino effect. As human beings' consumption has exceeded the Earth's purification capacity, residual pollution from carbon dioxide has accumulated. Due to the greenhouse effects brought on by this increased carbon dioxide, the air temperature worldwide has risen, and the ice on the Earth has melted, while oceans have swelled. As a result, the sea level has risen, and the biosphere is now on the verge of a catastrophic debacle. In the Earth's history, approximately 35 million years ago, the density of carbon dioxide was as high as 450 parts per million, and the air temperature at the time was 5 degrees Celsius higher than now, due to the greenhouse effect. It suggests that there was virtually no ice on the Earth, and the sea level was approximately 70 meters higher than the current level. In 2013, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, astonished the world by predicting that the temperature might rise by 2.6 degrees to 4.8 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. This statement is a virtual declaration of a state of emergency in the biosphere. According to this temperature prediction, the biosphere is approaching the status of 35 million years ago, when there was no ice on the Earth and the sea level was approximately 70 meters higher than now. The Earth's climate had started cooling down about 50 million years ago, and the ice started to pile up first in Antarctica 15 million years later. That is to say, 35 million years ago. The cooling down trend continued, and the ice started to build up in the northern hemisphere 3 million years ago, when the temperature had further dropped. The climate reached the current mild status suitable for living creatures, and human beings were hatched 200,000 years ago. Human beings have been reversing this cooling down process minus 5 degrees Celsius over 35 million years, within only 2 to 3 centuries after the Industrial Revolution, the latter 100 years in particular. In other words, we are turning the clock back to the age when there was no ice on the Earth, and the sea level was more than 70 meters higher. Crisis: extermination of living species. Living creatures have experienced near extermination 5 times every 100 million years. Wing and a prayer survived each crisis to hand over hope to the present. However, the number of living species suddenly started declining from about 1980. That is to say, 100 to 200 species are being exterminated day by day. This speed of extermination is extraordinary, said to be several hundred or even 1,000 times faster than the last 5 crises. This fact might mean that the 6th peril of extermination has already begun. The main cause of the extermination is human beings' mega-consumption. Sudden and drastic climate changes in the bioenvironment, such as global warming, could bring the extinction of living creatures that are not capable of adapting to the changes. Human beings' influence over the Earth is gigantic. Living creatures' reproductive functions have been eroded by poisonous chemical substances and nuclear residue. Tropical rainforests have been logged away. We selfishly control all water, although it is the springhead of all life. Simultaneously, human beings have damaged the ecosystem by geographically importing alien species. In the oceans, as 1/3 of carbon dioxide is absorbed by the sea, acidification of seawater is progressing at a dramatic rate. The acidification is causing a decrease in phytoplankton, the main resource to nourish sea lives, and reducing the sea population through deterioration of the oceanic ecosystem. Whilst human beings cannot survive without gifts from other living creatures, if the current speed of extermination continues, all species will disappear within 3 centuries. Having said so, if human beings disappear first, the scenario would be totally different. Crisis: Earth's purification capacity and residual pollution. Energy shortage is not a crisis. The Earth has various limitations, such as natural resources, energy supply, and the limited capacity to purify residual pollution. At around 1980, human beings' mass consumption exceeded the Earth's purification capacity. The further increase in consumption after that caused the vessel, the Earth's purification capacity, to overflow and remain unpurified as residual pollution. If consumption were to increase at the same rate as the current 3% economic growth rate, which doubles about every 23 years, residual pollution would double at the same speed. For human beings, the future crisis does not exist in energy shortage, but in the increase of residual pollution generated by overconsumption of energy and other resources in line with economic growth. Global warming is one of the phenomena caused by the residual carbon dioxide pollution. Dilemmas associated with all kinds of residual pollution, including greenhouse gases, poisonous chemical substances, and nuclear waste, are becoming amplified year by year, which will be passed on to the next generation. It seems that we would face a huge wall within 2 decades from now. The more belatedly we take countermeasures against the residual pollution issue, the greater the volume of accumulated residual pollution will become. The longer we put off undertaking those measures, the more the costs incurred by those measures would increase at an exponential rate. Those costs, in turn, would bankrupt the social maintenance and/or welfare budget, and we would face serious deterioration in the economic structure and living environment. A collapse of the economic structure would presage the drastic deterioration in the living environment. If human beings do not take countermeasures to decrease their consumption to the level of the Earth's purification capacity by themselves, the Earth's environment would metamorphose into one that is too harsh for living creatures' very survival, and that status would continue for thousands of years. When will we face the real crisis? Global warming conferences, actions, and numerical predictions. For ordinary people who are not specialists in environmental issues, it might be beneficial to have an understanding of the background behind the data announced by the global warming conferences. The common issue that is a root cause of the crises stated in this chapter is the fact that human beings' mass consumption surpassed the Earth's capacity in around 1980. Among the 3 crises, the first 2 crises, that is to say, rise in the sea level caused by global warming and extermination of living species, are progressing at a speed measured in hundreds or thousands of years. Based on this notion, I thought in the standpoint of both scientists who advise conferences on global warming, etc., regarding future predictions and governments. Government officials, whose terms are normally only a couple of years, tend to be more interested in whether or not the data predicted by scientists will adversely affect the actual economy and/or certain enterprises rather than the issue of degradation of the living environment 100 to 200 years from now. On the other hand, scientists are expected to answer the tough questions, as if posed by a prosecutor, on the long-term forecast of the Earth's future, which naturally are far more difficult than a weather forecast. Science progresses in line with the existence of an antithesis. Therefore, all kinds of scientific theories are destined to face scientists who advocate the antitheses. Under such circumstances, environmental scientists who are accountable for their explanations based only on yet unproven sets of data are expected at conferences to bear the burden of defending their arguments against governments and scientists with antitheses. Consequently, environmental scientists can provide only very modest predictions. That is to say, data sets introduced at conferences on global warming are very likely underestimated figures. Those data sets do not contain a safety margin. Considering that even jetliners are designed with a big safety margin and/or redundancies, it is ludicrous not to build in a safety margin for the risk to our biosphere that should be given the maximum safety margin. In this way, precious time is passing vainly on, but as the research progresses and governments change, the figures are revised to bigger ones at an accelerated pace. This trend becomes plain as day when one reads the reports from the global warming conferences over the past several decades. Considering the global warming crisis predictions, in order to make long-term predictions of the inherent opaqueness of the rise in the sea level, I believe that it would be more reasonable for scientists to empirically infer their long-term predictions from actual macro examples. That is to say, the long history of the Earth rather than struggle to make up a cover story based on established micro-theories. Good references for predicting the speed and height of the sea level increase can be found in evidence left behind in geological ice formations that trace back to sometime 130,000 years ago, relatively recent history in terms of the Earth's lifespan. This evidence exhibits the fact that the sea level increased by 5 meters per 1 degree Celsius increase in air temperature at a pace of 5 meters per century. I believe such an approach, when formulating predictions, is scientifically more reasonable. From this evidence, we can predict that the sea level will rise by approximately 4 meters before the end of this century. In my opinion, the level currently predicted at global warming conferences is completely off the track of the Earth's history. Furthermore, considering the current status, in which 100 to 200 species are becoming extinct every day, we have no doubt already entered the period of annihilation of all life. Taking a micro approach of protective measures for each endangered living species would not solve the problem. The root causes of the crises are the issues associated with human beings' mass consumption and residual pollution. At the current speed of extinction, all living creatures would disappear within 3 centuries. This is not just somebody else's problem. This means the extinction of human beings. Thus, it is critical for us human beings to have a counter strategy to control mass consumption, the root cause of extinction of living species. I predict that the first direct crisis to hit human society would be the collapse of the economic structure due to the accumulated residual pollution. The collapse would occur through a vicious cycle. Exponential increase in costs to treat external diseconomy, such as residual pollution, overflowing levies, etc., which would hinder government's ability to maintain other budget items. If human beings unreasonably continue to pursue the current economic growth of 3%, both our consumption and residual pollution theoretically would double within less than 25 years. But that is physically impossible with only one Earth. We will face our fate, an instant economic peril someday within less than 20 years, considering the nature of money that circulates the globe instantly. End of Chapter 2.